Nine-person volunteer citizen board appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the city council. Our procedure this evening is as follows. First, we will hear from the Planning and Development Services Unit, represented tonight by Mr. Chris Chang. Then the petitioner or his or her representative will make his or her presentation. Petitioners will have 5 minutes in which to make their presentation. The board members may ask questions of either the city or the petitioner. We will acknowledge any written comments received by the board. We will allow an appearing party to express their support or objections. The board will discuss the appeal and formulate a resolution to approve the appeal. 5 affirmative votes of the board will be required for an appeal to be granted. Finally, any qualified party who is aggrieved by a decision of the board can appeal that decision to the Washtenaw County Circuit Court on a timely basis. Roll call. I am here. Mike Daniel.
Here.
Dave DeVarty.
Here.
Megan Peters.
Here.
Nicole Eisenman.
Here.
Todd Grant.
Here.
Elizabeth Nelson.
Here.
Charlotte Wilson. We have a quorum. Moving on to approval of the agenda. Do I have any comments on the agenda or a motion to approve the agenda? Motion from Mike, support from Todd. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Moving on to approval of the minutes. We have minutes from the August 26th, 2019 meeting. Any comments or corrections to those minutes? If not, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move we approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, moving on to public hearings, petition ZBA 19-026-1643 Traver Street. Chris?
Right. Brian Burkett, Aspire Architecture, is representing the property owners, is requesting an alteration to a non-conforming structure, section 5.32.2, in order to construct an accessory dwelling unit, a second-story master suite, and a one-car carport to the north elevation of the residence. The proposed construction does not meet the required front setback. Here you can see it's a little kind of blurred out a little bit, but it's in yellow outline. It is just south of the public land, which is the STEAM School. It is just on the west side of Traver Road, off of Barton. It is also zoned R1C, which is single-family residential. You can see the school just to the north. It is surrounded by residential zoning, and it's kind of a triangular-shaped lot. What's not shown here is the petitioner has also acquired that triangular portion just to the north. I'll point it out with my mouse. That lot combination was approved approximately 10 days ago, so it is one triangular-shaped lot. It's under one ownership. Here's the survey showing the single lot with the lot that's been recently adjoining this lot. It's approximately about a 1,200 square foot house, about a 15,500 square foot lot total. You can see some of the trees that are located to the north of this site. And again, this is probably a little more accurate, showing the triangular-shaped lot as they've been combined. It's a little difficult to see, but there is a red line running across the front of this house. That's about a 35-foot front setback. That is the average front setback with the other houses within 100 feet. It is required a minimum setback of 25 feet in the R1C zoning district, and it's running right along the front of the house. I think if we go through to see the floor plans, as you can see that the proposed ADU and carport do not project any further than the existing portion of the house. Here you see about a 450 square foot ADU that's being proposed on the first floor along with the carport, single bay. Second story, you can see there's a master bedroom over the ADU. There is also a dining area that's on the rear of the house. That meets the rear and the side setback, so that's not part really of the nonconformance issue that's being looked at tonight. Roof, here you can see the roof lines of what's being proposed. Again, you can see the elevations from Traver Street. This is the front of the house. You can see with the carport, again, I'm going to point it out with my, and then you can see the ADU with the master bedroom up top. This is the rear of the house with the proposed addition. Again, you can see in the lower left-hand corner, that's the existing house, and what is being proposed in the right-hand corner with the addition and the carport. Again, these are just different views. You can see this one coming from Traver Street. Again, another view from Traver Street, looking at it, looking up really northbound. This is a picture of the rear of the house, along with the proposed addition. Existing home with the existing drive, leading to the single-bay garage, the neighbor to the south. Again, looking kind of south, you can see the front deck. This is where the proposed addition, or the ADU and the second floor addition and the carport will be constructed. These trees are to remain. I would assume by looking at the picture that that's the lot line that they've adjoined with the stakes. Again, another view of where the proposed addition will be located. Picture of the rear, looking south towards the neighbor where the proposed addition will be located. And this is a view of what's existing across the street on Traver. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Chris. Any questions for staff?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the second driveway and if that's been approved by,
Yes, because it has more than 100 feet of lot frontage, you're allowed to have 2 curb cuts. So it would meet code.
Good.
Chris, what's the setback requirement?
So the setback requirement R1C, the minimum is 25 feet, but it's also required to be average with the neighboring properties. So I'm going to go back to the slide that had that orange line right here. So what you've got is if you average it with the adjacent houses, this orange line running across is approximately 35 feet. That would be the required setback because you're averaging it with the adjacent houses. If those houses were closer or those were vacant lots, this would actually be in compliance because it's at 25 feet. And I'm going to run the mouse right across where the 25-foot line is, where the house front property line is shown. So they are asking for an alteration to a non-conforming structure as they're not going any deeper into the front setback.
And can you update me on how this accessory, it's R1C, that's a single family.
That's correct.
How does that work? It's becoming a duplex essentially.
It's not a duplex, it's an accessory dwelling unit, which are allowed in all the R1s and the R2A districts. So they have to meet a minimum lot size. This does, it meets the minimum zoning district, and it must be smaller than, I believe, 800 square feet, and this ADU is less than 800 square feet, so it would be permitted by zoning code.
Mike?
So that lot that I guess is technically to the north, that's, from the pictures that we saw, that's a very steep lot with some trees on it?
Yes, you can see the trees, and there's some elevation changes. Some of them you can kind of see through some of the pictures, and I'm happy to refer to any
And
pictures if you want to look at the elevations of the trees.
That's owned by someone else?
No, that is
Okay.
owned by the same property
Got it.
owner, and they did a lot combination, I believe, on the 19th of September, somewhere in there in the last 2 weeks that it was approved.
Okay.
So it is one triangular shaped lot now. So I think this slide,
So there's no side setback issues?
that's correct.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Any other questions for staff? Okay. Dave, did you have something?
Did we get a verification? When I was there, it looked like this, and I guess I'll ask the developer. It looked like there's a black walnut there that the carport would take out, but I'll ask them.
Okay.
So,
I'll let them-
but you didn't, the city didn't do any verification that the trees are going to stay there?
I believe the 3 trees that you see to the right of the lot line that they adjoined, those will be saved. I can't comment on that particular tree. I think the applicant will be able to respond. But because this is zone R1, we have no jurisdiction over any type of trees.
Although we are approving an alteration.
That's correct.
Right. Okay.
Okay. The petitioner could please state your name for the record and sign in. You have 5 minutes.
My name is Brian Burkett. I'm an architect representing my clients, Joseph Whited and Rachel Toon, who are the owners of the property. And I want to thank Chris. You summed it up pretty well already, most of the arguments that I'd make. Originally, the property was owned, so the 2-lot situation, the owner did own both lots. They had previously sold one and have reacquired it in order to do this project. As part of reacquiring it, they're joining the lots so that they can develop it. Had they not wanted to go forward with this project, they'd have left it in the hands of the other owner, who would have probably developed a house on that lot. So they've kind of reacquired it in order to do this project. So one of the things we're trying to do, of course, is we're trying to not make the extension into the setback more egregious than it currently is. The disparity between the average of existing and the actual stated setback is about 10 feet, which is pretty far. The existing house is already behind the stated 25-foot, although I understand that it doesn't count in this case because of that average of existing. But we're doing what we can to stay within the parameters of the existing house front line, giving the clients the space that they need in order to both move in the rest of their children. They're a blended family, and they have, I believe it's 4 or 5 children that are trying to all get into this 1,200 square foot house, as well as move in her mother, who will be occupying the ADU for her life, basically. Beyond that, the shape of the addition itself, like I said, we try to keep it within the parameters of the existing front of the house. The shape of it's determined by a couple of factors, both the amount of space that we're looking to add to the property, as well as the steep side lot. So you mentioned already that there's some pretty severe grading off to the side of it. If we were to adhere to the average of existing setback, which again is 10 feet behind where we are, we just simply wouldn't be able to execute the project. Ideally, we'd have stayed beyond that, but we just simply wouldn't have been able to get the square footage that we were looking for without running into huge grading problems on that side. We're already going to be coming up against some difficult factors in terms of the carport. If you take a look at your screens, the right side of the carport is getting pretty deep into that steep hill already. So we're going to have some access issues, which we'll take care of through landscaping already. To answer your question, Mr. Givardi, there are 2 trees that will be removed as a result of the driveway going in. But again, the other 3 trees that we see there are also preventing us from changing the shape of the addition that we're proposing, because we do want to keep as many of those as we can. That about sums it up. Were there any other questions?
Thank you. Questions, Dave?
So these trees are fairly large trees, and I'm assuming the second tree is the other black walnut closer to the street?
Yes, closer to the street.
So those are 2 significant hardwood trees, and, you know, I'm just troubled by that, and I would urge you as the architect to encourage the property owner to mitigate the loss of those trees by encouraging them to plant some other hardwood trees in appropriate
Absolutely,
locations.
absolutely. Actually,
So,
their mother who's moving in is a horticulturist who's planning to develop the whole site.
Right. So just, it would make me feel a lot better at the loss of these. They've got to be at least the girth of those trees in hardwood, that they don't grow fast.
Yeah, it's pretty significant.
It's got to be at least 80-year-old trees.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else here to speak on this petition? I will note we did receive a letter of objection from the neighbors at 1639 Traver Road. With that, we are in discussion. Dave?
One more question of staff. There's this stretch of Traver that's closest to Barton, and the school is right there. There isn't a sidewalk on either side of Traver along this stretch, halfway up. And I know there's been some battles at council about putting sidewalks in and assessing homeowners along there. Can you give us an update on what the situation is with the sidewalks there along that stretch of Traver?
I don't have much more to add as far as any discussion that was being held regarding additional sidewalks. I do know Councilman Nelson is here, who may have more input than I do as far as what's going on with the sidewalks, so.
Okay.
This is purely anecdotal, but the owner actually of this property was heavily involved in advocating for those sidewalks be installed. My recent conversations with her indicated that that is not on the table at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Discussion.
Yeah, Dave?
Initially, when I looked at this, I was concerned with essentially doubling the square footage. Seeing the letter from somebody, a neighbor objecting to it, the loss of what was apparent to me would be the loss of at least one of these old black walnut trees, and apparently 2 of them. But as I look at this now, it's essentially within the confines of all of our zoning code, current zoning code. The only thing weighing against it is this averaging setback, which I see as a real impediment. It's still, by being within, it's not encroaching into the 25-foot setback that a R1C would require if there were no further setback properties. I'm going to be for this, even though initially after doing my tour of the site, I was reluctant on this one. I can't see any reason with the lower standard of just a simple modification or alteration to an existing dwelling. I can't see any reason to oppose it personally. I just would hope that the owners, after they do this, do something to mitigate the loss of those trees.
Any further discussion or a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Dave.
Petition ZBA 19-026, 1643 Traver Street. Alteration to a non-conforming structure. Based on the following findings of fact and in accordance with the established standards for approval, the Zoning Board of Appeals hereby grants permission from Section 532(2) to alter a non-conforming structure per submitted plans. A, the alteration complies as nearly as practicable with the requirements of the zoning chapter and will not have a detrimental effect on neighboring property.
I have a motion. Do I have support?
Yes.
Support from Nicole. Dave?
Yes.
Megan? Yes. Nicole?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
I also vote yes. Mike?
Yes.
The request is granted.
Thank you very
Moving
much.
on to
One more thing.
Oh, yes.
It was great to see a chicken coop in the backyard.
They love their chicken coop. We actually placed some windows to make sure that their mother can view the chicken coop.
Moving on to petition ZBA 19024, 2275 West Stadium Boulevard. Chris?
Okay. Bellis Sipos, managing partner of 2275 West Stadium LLC, is requesting a 60-square-foot variance from section 5.24.4 on-premises exterior signs to allow 240 square feet of tenant signage. The code requires the subject property not to exceed 180 square feet. This site is located on West Stadium, north of Liberty. It is zoned C2B, which is Business Retail District. It is surrounded by C3 and other types of commercial-type businesses, with a little bit of industrial to the west. Here you can see it was previously a gas station that has been removed, and an office building has been built in its place. Again, you can see the surrounding businesses in this aerial. So they built approximately 6 suites on this, 5 on the ground floor and 1 up top. They have 90 feet of frontage along West Stadium. So the sign code allows for twice what your building frontage is. 90 feet equals 180 square foot of signage to be divvied up between the 6 businesses. Again, you can see the location of the building. It is by site planning up closer to the road than a lot of other buildings, but it does require to be at least a minimum of 10 feet from the road in the zoning district that it's been constructed. Again, this is the existing survey. You can see the gas station that was previous there. This is the Hot Pot Chen Chinese restaurant just to the south. That's got a lot of shared parking and access. Here you can see the north elevation of the building. You can also see, I think this is helpful as far as what the signage that they want to divvy up. If you were to average it out to give each of them 240 square feet divided by those 6 instead of the 180 square feet divided by the 6. So they are looking for additional signage, wall signage in this case, for the property. Again, they do have 2 frontages, or I'm sorry, kind of 2 faces that if you were to drive by along Stadium, that you would look at it from the north and from the south. So they kind of mirror each other as far as both facades to the building. Here's what is existing now, the office building that is 90 feet wide. Again, this is if you were looking at it, if you were driving kind of probably eastbound down on West Stadium Boulevard. Again, another close-up look. There is some signage up there for a current tenant. And again, that's the vacant building right now with the other tenants in the future. This is the rear of the building. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Chris. Questions for Chris?
Yeah, I have a
Yeah,
question.
Todd?
I looked at the material, at this point, I'm not really convinced, I don't really see a clear difference between what they would have to do and what they're proposing. And I'm also wondering if they gave away too much square footage to AT&T, and now they're stuck with diminished square footage for the other ones. But the main problem I had, I didn't see a real clear before and after, you know, what they have to do and what they want. It just looks like the signs are a little bit bigger, but there's not really a wayfinding problem because all the frontage of the buildings aligns in one road. So you pull in off the street and you're right there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't really know what the problem is. So I'm looking for maybe you and the applicant to really explain that in a little more detail, why they really need a variance. I'm not convinced at this point.
Right, so what's allowed at this time is 180 square foot
Correct.
of total signage. So if you were to divide that by the 6, you know, we know that you could get approximately 30 square feet per business that they've proposed.
Right.
That's up to them whether they wanted to go further and say, we're gonna do 40 on one and 20 on another. That's up to the applicant how they wanna divvy that signage up. What they're asking though is for 240 to exceed that, and I'm going to let them respond to, because I assume they wanna have from that 30, they wanna allow probably 50 per business or something like
Yeah,
that.
they want as much as
So-
they can get, but I just don't see why people would be confused and, as I said, they wouldn't be able to identify which of the 5 storefronts was the right one to go into. They're presumably gonna get out of the car and be in the sidewalk, and I just don't see a problem here, but that's for the applicant to convince me.
Chris, real quick, is there any other signage out here? Like, is there a monument sign, or is it just this wall signage?
There's not a monument sign proposed for this site, but if the applicant wanted to come in and propose a monument sign, he would be permitted a monument sign of up to 200 square feet, but he will be back here because we've made him set that building up so close to the road. He would need a variance from that, the setback of that monument sign, so he would have to come back in for a variance on the front setback of that sign.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Chris? Dave?
So if we granted this variance, the monument sign is totally separate. They could also have a monument sign?
That's correct. But they would still have to come back in for the height and the setback of that sign, but it would be
I understand.
permitted up to a 200 square foot sign. And I would say that they have hardship because as far as our planning and zoning process, we required him to be set back 10 feet. If he wanted to be pushed back further, we required that minimum, so.
Right.
Any other questions? Okay, if you could please state your name for the record and sign in, you'll have 5 minutes.
My name is Bela Sipos. I am a managing member of 2275 LLC. When we initially came for the site plan, we had renderings of the building and the signage that we thought we were gonna get were present on those renderings of the building. Now, I understand ignorance of the ordinance isn't any excuse, and I'm not making that as an excuse. I'm asking that we recognize that the retail frontage is not on, it's like many other places in town, and it's not on Stadium. This runs perpendicular to Stadium. All their doors are perpendicular to the Stadium. All of these retailers are gonna wanna be seen somewhat from Stadium. It's not a matter of just pulling into the parking lot and knowing they're there. They're gonna want other people to know they're there as they're driving by. I'm going to let Andrew from Image 360, he's our sign guy, describe to you where we're at with signage and what we're asking for.
Andrew Coleman, owner of Image 360 Traverse City. And if you could, Chris, go back to, I want to say it was maybe slide number 2 that showed the 3 different options. So at one point, I had additional text on the top that outlined, as far as square footage. I have a few copies of those. If you'd like, I can hand them off. But just to give you a rundown, what you're seeing at the top, number 1, is the current 180 square feet maximum divided by the 6 tenants. And because Reinhardt and Capital Title are on the 2nd floor, and it's important for them to have visibility from the street, they do have a lot of walk-in traffic for real estate reasons. So they have to share the square footage signage with the first floor tenants. So when we take that 180 square feet and we divide it by essentially 8 tenants, as you can see, the first floor tenants are only getting 9 square feet per wall. And I can tell you from a sign standpoint, visibility-wise, especially driving down a road, that is just not adequate, and it's going to really limit the amount of drive-by traffic that business gets and could create some wayfinding issues that way. So when this was brought to our attention that this is what we have to work with, I worked closely with John at the city to look at what are our other options. We talked a little bit about a freestanding sign, but as Chris mentioned, there's some challenges with that idea. And we also talked about what's called a business center sign, which we are allowed to have, and we're allowed to have at 180 square feet. So that would be 180 square feet for regular tenant signage and 180 square feet for the business center signage. So if you look at option 2, it's the second one on the page there, that shows the business center signage right under the Reinhardt text. And then it shows the rest of the allotment for the other tenants. And those other tenants with this proposal are allowed to get 18 square feet per wall, so a total of 36 for the north wall and for the south wall. So that I feel good about from a visibility standpoint of giving people the signage, tenants the signage that they need to be visible. However, if from a visual standpoint, looking at the building architecturally, Bela's really created a great, modern, clean building. And we both agree that, well, it's redundant, it's busy, the names up there on the business center sign are a bit small. So what we're asking today is that in lieu of the business center sign, we will give up our ability to ever do that business center sign on the wall. We are simply asking for, so to give you a breakdown, we're allowed 180 to start, plus 180 for the business center sign, which is 360 total square feet. We're allowed to do that. We're saying instead of that, would you allow us to do 240 square feet total, no business center signage? And I feel as a sign professional, from my standpoint, that it's an adequate number. We're not asking for more than I think is visually needed for the space. It doesn't seem overdone. So if you look at option number 3, that shows exactly what we're asking for. 18 square feet per elevation, 18 square feet on north elevation, 18 square feet on south elevation per tenant, plus Reinhardt and Capital Title on the second floor get signage to ensure their visibility.
I would just like to add that our initial assumption was the retail tenants would get the typical 2 square feet per lineal front foot, which would have given them 48 square feet. What we're asking for is considerably less.
Thank you. Questions for the petitioners?
Yeah, I have questions. So, going back to this 3-stage picture here, the middle one has the business sign, as you call it, correct? So, but that's the side that's facing perpendicular to Stadium, correct? So why would you put the business sign at the far end, the farthest away from the Stadium? rather
No,
than-
it's the closest. to
Oh, it
Stadium.
is closest, okay.
This is the north elevation.
Got you.
This would also be reflected on the south
Okay,
elevation.
now I got it. So why wouldn't you just have a business sign facing Stadium? Because if you're coming here saying that it's going to create slow traffic down as people are looking for the spot, or maybe a wayfinding or traffic hazard problem, why wouldn't you just make it really simple and have the state sign right out front facing Stadium so people could see it as they drive by?
Because they won't look at it like that. As they're driving this way, they'll be able to see it, and as they're driving north or south, they'll be able to see it on the side of the building. That's where it's gonna be most visible. You notice when people put monument signs out, they don't turn them parallel to the road, they turn them perpendicular to the
Yeah.
road. This building sits perpendicular to the road. That's what I'm asking to be recognized.
Well, why wouldn't you do the business sign perpendicular to the road then? So they could see it at both directions?
Yeah.
Well, we would, but what we're saying is that will clutter up the building. You know, we'd have 360 square feet of signage, and we're only asking for 240.
Well, I'm not worried about the number, I'm just worrying what seems to me the logic of your presentation is going to be cluttered if it's on the facade, or it's going to be cluttered if it's out front facing stadium. It's just another sign. I don't understand clutter. I mean, it's a very nice building, don't get me wrong. Your argument seems illogical to me. It's, first of all, I don't believe that it's gonna be a wayfinding or a traffic hazard problem. That's just a non-starter with me. And I think, well, let me ask a different question. How big is the AT&T sign?
That is,
You're obviously locked in with that with a lease.
it's 13 and a half square feet, which is, when we originally created the drawings based on what we thought was 2 square feet per retail storefront, that was well under that, so we had no reason to believe that
Right.
that would be a problem. So, as a point of reference, that 13 and a half square feet that's actually a little bit, slightly smaller than what each tenant could be allowed at 19 square feet.
And I don't know that you've demonstrated that the increase in size of the 5 signs is going to solve the visibility problem from stadium. The burden is on you to show that this increase in sign for each of the 5 tenants is now going to make it visible to somebody driving by at 40 miles an hour, where the current requirement will not be visible driving along stadium. That's the problem you have, right? You've not
Right.
shown that.
What's the best way to demonstrate that for you? So as a
I don't
point
know,
of,
that's your problem.
9 square feet is roughly 2 foot tall, 4 foot wide. Most, on average, and I have some examples if you'd like to see them, I printed them out, of other business center signs throughout the area, they average around 30 square foot per business front. So a typical roadside sign that a contractor might put in, just to give you something that you could envision out there, those are typically 6 square feet, 2 foot by 3 foot, so they're smaller. So I do feel that it's too small for the building wall, and it simply won't be visible enough traveling 40 miles an hour down the road. And if it helps to give you these other examples, I've created 10 packets to show other examples of many businesses that have on the average 30 square feet per business front, to show how it's more appropriate.
These are other businesses that run perpendicular
Yeah.
to the road.
I mean, in one sense, this really isn't that big a deal. People always want the biggest sign they can get. I'm just
But we're not even
I'm just
asking
sort of
for
not convinced that
typical
you really need it.
retail signage. That's what I was trying to, typical retail signage is, and Chris can confirm this, it's 2 square feet per lineal front foot. I look at the storefronts as being their frontage, you know, and I understand, but there are many other examples in town of buildings that sit perpendicular to the road, and their signage looks like it's based on their storefronts where their front door is. And we're not even asking for that much signage.
Well, the problem I have with Stadium when I drive it is they're already, the next one obviously is the big Arborland sign, which is totally a different thing, but I'm overwhelmed by the number of signs already on Stadium. That, you know, when I set out, I have my address in my little GPS. If I don't know where it is, I already know where I'm going. It's impossible to be safe driving along Stadium and read every sign. I mean, I don't know about the other members of the board, but I find that impossible to do.
And
I
is
have
that
to
a-
know where I'm going first.
Is that a
It's just
matter
too
of the
dangerous.
business count?
Maybe it's me being old, I don't know.
And there are a lot of businesses on
Yeah, there's a
Stadium.
lot.
And
Right.
what I'm concerned about is, so if the sign is too small, and in that case you're driving looking for it,
Yeah.
it's going to be that much harder to find it if it's too small. Especially for the tenants that would be furthest away from Stadium Drive. 9 square feet on that end cap at the very back is gonna be really hard to see as you're driving by.
You know, in addition, the business center sign, which would allow us to have bigger signs on the building, I just don't see people driving by looking up. This building in the front is very tall.
Well, one way around, of course, just to have the numbers. You know, in other words, is X number to Y number Stadium, and then that would tell people where to pull in, but, you know.
But-
It's a very nice building, I like the building. so.
The electric company assigns the addresses. You know, we don't have anything to do with that.
Okay, all right.
Dave?
I've got a question first for Chris and then for the developers. As they're proposing giving up their building identification sign, reducing that 180 square feet, so the net is gonna be a little bit less, 240 versus 360. Once they give that up, can we hold them to that?
I would put it in the motion. We have a track it software that we can put restrictions, so when it, at least when I go in and I look for previous signage to see if there are any restrictions, we can put restrictions in there. You'd have to put it in the motion that they are giving up on their business center signage.
Okay, so if a subsequent owner, if they sold it to another owner and that owner came in and said, oh, we want our business center sign now, we could stop them from having that?
The variance
make
runs
them-
with the land.
or make
Yes.
Okay. That's my question for staff. Now, I think it's the Burger King that was immediately to the north?
Yes.
The former Burger King. So as people are driving from the north, that driveway doesn't serve your lot.
No, it doesn't.
The next driveway
Correct.
coming from the north to the east, or right there, it's north-south, basically. So the signage, are tenants gonna want signs on both sides, or are you leaving it up to them, or are
I'm
you?
leaving it up to them, but they only get a certain square footage of signage.
And
which
they could put it on one side or both sides?
Exactly. They'd have to share, you know, for both sides.
And then the parking lot, I noted that the Hot Pot Chinese restaurant there, it looks like when you redid your parking lot, that parking lot was also done.
Correct.
Are you in ownership of that adjacent
No.
building? So that was just in partnership with them, you paved at the same time?
Yeah, it was, yes.
Okay. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioners? Okay, oh, Mike, did you have? Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone from the public to speak on this petition? I will note that we did receive a letter of support from adjacent property owners.
I went to the surrounding 18 businesses and asked them for support.
Yes, so it
That's-
looks like these are all adjacent
Correct.
tenants at various businesses nearby. With that, we are in discussion. Mike?
So this is very close to where I live, so I know this area well. As someone who doesn't really cook for himself, I walked a lot of these businesses for food. I was actually quite heartbroken to see that Burger King close. I used to walk there a decent amount for a delicious Whopper sandwich, but it closed
Don't
one
hold it
night.
against.
So anyways, I know this building well, and it is unique in the sense of the frontage on Stadium, it's a perpendicular building, and it's also, on that section of Stadium, there's a crosswalk right there. And so people use that, right? Because either then you have to walk all the way to Liberty, or all the way up to, you know, another almost half mile to the next light. So people use that crosswalk a lot. I use that crosswalk. So the last thing I'd want is a car having to turn and try to look at a sign facing Stadium that they couldn't see until right in front of the building, and then accidentally hit somebody. So I think if we're gonna have signage, it's better to have signage going along the sides of the building they can see as they drive up from either direction. So given the unique nature of this particular building, especially with the crosswalk right there, I'm gonna support this and vote for it.
Dave?
And normally, I'm very tough on signs because I supported the rationale for the implementation of the sign ordinance, which was to reduce the on-street clutter, making it easier to navigate without being distracted. But I think your proposal to do away with the center sign, which is also, you have the right for 180 feet there, you're essentially making a concession that does that, that gives us that reduction in signage clutter. So if you were just asking for the increase to the 240, I would not support it. But if, by tying in your compromise and giving up the center signage, I'm willing to support it. I want to see if I can put that in here as part of the resolution. And if other members of the board are willing to adopt this with that restriction, that's what I'm prepared to vote for.
Further discussion? Elizabeth?
I have a question about something I think Mr. Chang said earlier about how we put them in the position of making a monument sign more difficult because of the setback. They're making use of the minimum setback, or we didn't, it wasn't, is the zoning what required them to be that close to the street?
Yes.
Okay, so the zoning required that they not be set back further than 10.
Correct.
Okay, all right,
That's
thanks.
Yeah.
I just
Nicole?
like to say, I agree with Dave DeVarty here, and, if he can word the amendment to word our statement, I would be in support of it to eliminate the business center sign and provide the 240 square feet.
What would it mean for a new owner to come in and have, like, reopen that conversation of having different signage allowance?
They have to ask for a variance, I think. Would they have to ask for a further variance?
Can you repeat the question? I was just.
Like, if
kinda
a new
looking at
owner did come in and buy the property, what would they need to do to either increase or decrease the signage? Come back to us?
They would have to come back to the zoning board of appeals, because we're gonna restrict them then, that they're not going to be allowed. They've got the maximum signage, they will not be able to do to do the business center signage. So they would have to come back in front of the board, but yeah, I'm not sure what the hardship is. They're conceding the business center signage.
I'm prepared to make a motion with that additional
May I
requirement.
make an additional comment?
Yeah,
Sure.
go ahead, Todd.
So we're looking at the 5 criteria. I don't think this meets the criteria E, which is the minimum that would allow reasonable use of the land or structure. So, among other ones, but I'd just like to point that out, because we do have those criteria.
Yeah,
I will
Dave?
be voting no.
I see
even
this
though-
with the requirement that they give up their business center signage. I see this as a win, as advantageous. We're reducing the signage. We're doing something that is in greater keeping with the original intent of having the sign ordinance, which is to reduce visual clutter. I mean, how you parse the minimum necessary, I see this as, it's a gain for the
Yeah.
city. So anyway, I'm gonna make the motion with the additional provision. If somebody wants to amend that out, fine. If people want to vote against it, no matter what, that's fine. But I want to make the motion if I can.
Yes, please, thank you, Dave.
Petition ZBA 19-024, 2275 West Stadium Boulevard. Variance. Based on the following findings of fact and in accordance with the established standards for approval, the Zoning Board of Appeals hereby grants the following variance from Chapter 55, Unified Development Code, Section 524-4, on-premises exterior signs, with the additional provision that this variance is granted with the requirement that no further business center signage will be allowed. A variance of 60 square feet to allow 240 square feet of tenant signage for the multi-tenant property. A, the alleged practical difficulties are peculiar to the property and result from conditions which do not exist generally throughout the city. B, that the practical difficulties which will result from a failure to grant the variance include substantially more than mere inconvenience, inability to attain a higher financial return, or both. C, the variance, if granted, will not significantly affect surrounding properties. D, the circumstances of the variance request are not self-imposed. E, the variance request is the minimum necessary to achieve reasonable use of the land or structure.
I have support. Support. Todd?
No.
Elizabeth?
No.
I vote yes. Mike Daniel?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Megan?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
The request is granted. Moving on to petition ZBA 19-027-3521 Washtenaw Avenue. Chris?
Johnson Sign Company, representing Brixmore Arborland LLC, is seeking a 50-foot height variance from section 5.24.42 ground signs and a 46.8 square foot per sign face variance from section 5.24.13A changeable sign copy signs. The variances would allow a 75-foot tall ground sign to remain and the existing time and temperature panels to have changeable copy messages and text. This site is located just on the north side of Washtenaw Ave, on the west side of US 23. It is zone C3 fringe commercial. It does have residential to the north and a portion to the west, but it, for the most part, has commercial along Washtenaw Avenue. Here you can see the aerial of the existing Arborland site, along with the surrounding residential and commercial businesses, and a close-up. It's really difficult to see where the sign is located on site. I'm going to point to it kind of in the general area, down in this area, which is where the Chili's restaurant is.
I think we all know where it is.
Okay, it is iconic sign, Arborland. The people out there home watching, they can
Just
get an
like we know
idea.
where the Campanile is, you know?
So here's the existing Arborland sign to the left, what they're proposing on the right-hand side. Just for clarification, I'll look at the size of the signage. What they're proposing for where you see where it says 5 below is a type of changing face sign. They will need a variance from that because that is out of compliance. You're only allowed under the current code of 15 square feet per side. They'll also need a variance from the height. From 50 feet is the maximum height of a pole sign is 25 feet. This one is around 75 feet. From my research, I can tell you that there was no sign permit that I could find in my research. It was built in approximately 1967 at that time, but it is a non-conforming sign. It is not historically protected by our historic district, although any types of improvements probably would be supported if it did go to the HDC as far as trying to enhance the sign. It is more than 50 years old. As you can see on the close-ups, I think they're going to improve the steel girders here. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have about the Arborland sign.
Thanks, Chris. Questions for staff? Dave?
So the changeable face, is that going to change and display different tenants, or is that?
I'm going to
but
say
it's
yes
gonna-
when I see 5 below on there. Currently, it just has the temperature and the time. Under the current ordinance, you're only allowed to have a 15 square foot maximum sign panel, and it would only be allowed to change every 15 minutes. I see here with the 5 below that, I'll let them answer, but yes, they will be changing, I assume, the face, the copy every 15 minutes.
Okay.
Additional questions for staff? Okay.
So,
Oh, yeah, Todd.
just to be clarifying, so currently, right now, obviously, it's the time and temperature. Are they proposing to get rid of that and have flashing tenant names instead?
I think they're going to keep both. I'll let them respond, but they'll
Okay.
also be doing advertising, I would assume, every 15 minutes, along with showing the time and the temperature on that changing copy.
Okay.
Okay, if you could please state your name for the record and sign in, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Brian Wissenhunt with Brixmore Property Group. I'm the acting property manager for Arborland. We acquired the shopping center in 2016. I've been the acting property manager since that time. I did not grow up in the area, but when we acquired the shopping center, I knew exactly where it was because of the height of the sign. It's a very iconic sign in this area. We're a nationwide property owner, but we own 12 properties in the Southeast Michigan market. And I can tell you just from industry and/or talking to customers, most people don't identify with shopping centers by name, but if you tell them Arborland, they know exactly where you're talking about. One of the problems we have sustained in our first 3 years of ownership is that the sign has become quite obsolete and has become very difficult to maintain with the neon signage in the iconic A and the time and temp board, where you can't even find bulbs to replace the time and temp any longer, and the neon's very susceptible to outages due to weather. I can share that, I mean, in the first 3 years, we have probably spent over $10,000 in maintenance costs, just trying to keep it. As you saw in many of the photos, it's just very, very difficult to keep it in a first-rate condition, so it can actually serve benefit to the community. We partnered with Johnson Sign in an attempt to retain that iconic look that is so recognizable throughout the community, and really try to preserve it, but also bring it into modern technology. Brixmor prides itself very much on trying to sustain green initiatives at several properties. Last year alone, we recently upgraded all of our parking lot lighting to LED fixtures, and we're really trying to, lessen our carbon footprint at the shopping centers that we manage. The main thing for holding the look, for the time and temp board, they don't really make that style board anymore. That's really become an obsolete thing in the industry. So LCD display panels are what are currently offered. The reason we are asking for the tenant identification is that is one of the biggest things our tenants ask for us, is that they really don't have a roadside signage that lets people know who's in Arborland Shopping Center. It's very protected by tree lines and a very wooded property at that. That we are open to that, but we feel that it would be beneficial to those tenants if we could flash the time, then flash a logo, then flash the temperature, and then flash a different logo. We're not really looking to advertise or do any kind of sales displays of anything of that kind. One, we think it's too high to really be effective, but we're just hoping that it at least draws some attention. There's so many people who pass along 23 who are not from the community that it will hopefully draw in, customer interaction from around the area. To answer to Chris's point, we do plan to wrap the legs to make it a more cleaner presentation. We are going to, if people have been out recently, we've changed some of the paint schemes to make it a little bit more newer look. It's been very well received by the community, and we are hoping to match some of the colors with the legs to the colors we've implemented in the shopping center. So that is one change we're making. We're going to do away with the blue on the legs and make it more of a dark bronze.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the petitioner? Todd?
Yes, how would you allocate in your proposal time between temperature, the time, and tenant names?
We would comply with what the city requires. If 15 minutes is the interval in which we change, we would adhere to current compliances in regards to that. We would not have it be constantly changing. The current board does not do it at 15-minute intervals, so we'll comply with that requirement.
So let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. So you would have the temperature displayed for 15 minutes, and then the time displayed for 15 minutes, and then a tenant's name for 15 minutes.
If that's what the city requires us to do, we will comply with that. That sounds like a long time to have that up there, but I think it's right now it blinks a little bit more frequently than that, but I do know it's an outdated board. So we will
I wouldn't claim to
comply.
be an expert on the city ordinances.
Mhm.
My memory of the applicable ones, there's no rules about how you would rotate between time and temperature and tenant names. So I guess I'm asking given that assuming that there isn't an ordinance or requirement,
Okay.
what would you be doing?
I would like to defer that to Johnson Signs. They are more of the expert on what would probably be the most beneficial.
Yeah, I'm Will Johnson with Johnson Sign Company. So these boards, you can
basically schedule them how you'd want, but typical for something like this would be about 6 seconds.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but it's adjustable.
Thank you, sir.
Dave?
Question for Chris. If, I just want to state for the record, and anybody that's been here for a while knows my complaints about the university's sign by their stadium that changes constantly and is a very distracting sign for anybody driving along there. And I don't like changeable signs, and I think they're totally contrary to the original intent of why we have a sign ordinance, is to reduce distractions by these signages. But my question for Chris, if this is a changeable sign and they lowered it to 25 feet, could they do that without a variance? Or down to ground level?
They wouldn't need the variance from the height, but they still would need the variance from the size of this sign, because they're asking for approximately 46 square feet per side. They're only allowed a 15 square foot maximum sign panel per side.
So they would be allowed a 3x5 sign panel on each side for 30 feet?
Correct. That would only be allowed to have changeable copy
And
every
what height,
15
and what would
minutes.
their height max be on?
25 feet.
And that would, so they would be 20, and they could do that without a variance?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Nicole?
The changeable sign, is that intended to just be black and white, or would it be colors of logos?
To keep with the look, I mean, we prefer to keep it kind of a static color. Right now, it's currently white. So we would, again, we're trying to keep it as close to what it has been historically. So we weren't being too aggressive with that, so we presented it as a white.
Does the sign come all the way down and then is replaced, or do you work on it in-site or on-site?
Yeah, so the couple different ways with the A, our plan was to bring it back, to restore it. The Arborland portion would be refurbished on site, and the message part of it would be on site as well.
Thanks. Any other questions from the,
I have one more question.
yeah, Nicole?
So the Arborland section here, is that you'll be refurbishing what's there currently, or you'll be removing it and replacing it with something new, because this looks like a different font style?
Yeah, so if you go back, I don't know if you can go back to the existing pictures, there's a couple, maybe the other direction that showed right there. You can kind of see the existing face of that. It's a flexible fabric, call it flex face. That's going to be changed out to the new font with the new logo, with new retainers and new skin, and it's going to be all painted with new lighting as well.
Any other questions? Yeah, Dave?
Chris, are you aware of any other changeable signs in Ann Arbor at this point, other than that U of M sign by the stadium?
The only ones that may possibly have come in for permit would be like maybe a gas station or something like that, but nothing of this size, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anyone from the public here to speak on this petition? Seeing no one, we are in discussion.
Yep.
Yes, Todd?
So I look at this sign as sui generis. When I came for my first grad program in '77, this is the one thing that I remember coming from the airport. And I think many of us here are familiar with the Citgo sign, perhaps some of us are, that's in Kenmore Square in Boston. You don't screw with it. So I think this is a sign, I'm surprised it has not been historically preserved. I would urge you, Ms. Nelson, as a member of the city council, maybe look into that. I mean, I think if they were to significantly change this sign, or we were to somehow amend this ordinance to do that, people would be PO'd. I think that people would be upset. I would like to amend it that if they want to have a flashing sign, I'm fine, but consistent with the current ones, which is time and temperature only. There are so many tenants there that they're really not going to get an additional advertisement for any one tenant. Everybody knows Arborland very well, like Briarwood. Everybody knows where it is. If you're gonna go shopping there, you already know all the folks that are there, and that's really not a problem. But I look at this as really a very unique, special part of Ann Arbor. I mean, it's not classy like the Campanile, but I'm glad that their proposal is to preserve as much of it as possible. I think including tenant's name is not gonna get anything that you don't have. I would like the ordinance to be amended that they keep the sign as much as possible, to upgrade it consistent with new materials, and, you know, changing the font to make it more easily readable is nice. And I like the time and the temperature. I used it a lot driving up on the check and see what the temperature is. And nobody really needs it for time anymore, because we all have smartphones and smart watches and all that, and the little TV in our cars. But it's a nice indicator that, you know, here we are, and here's Washtenaw, and here's where you pull off. So to me, this is the special piece of Ann Arbor. It shouldn't be screwed with.
Elizabeth?
Just to echo Todd's point, I have a question. Well, first of all, I'm still sad about losing the Ipsy Arbor sign. I'm still grumpy about that. So we definitely can't lose this sign. So, if we, sitting at this table, felt strongly about that sign remaining black and white, I mean, there's nothing to prevent them from, to prevent the sign from being changed to be multicolor, just because, I mean, there's nothing in this variance that requires that it remain black and white, is there?
Not in the sign code, no.
Okay. I mean, to Todd's point, like, how would us sitting at this table dictate that it remain time and temperature? Is that even something that we can do?
I'm just thinking out loud that you may grant the variance, obviously, because if you leave the existing size, they're gonna need, it's too big. It's 46 square feet per side, too big. But there may be something that we could put in the, you know, we're gonna give the variance for the, because you wanna keep the existing size for the time and temperature, but, you know, regulate that you're not gonna be able to change copy other than time and temperature. It's not gonna be a changeable copy sign except for time and temperature.
And maybe there should be something there that they preserve the general shape and the colors of the current sign before it becomes some historical piece. I don't know what the city of Boston has done with the Citgo sign, but I do know that it has special status. Anybody who's going to a Red Sox games gets off there and walks, and everybody sees it. You know when you're driving in the very crowded city of Boston where you are in Kenmore Square. By looking up at the sign, you see it. It's a wayfinding device.
Dave?
I'm going to oppose this. I'm really against these changeable signs, just because of what I said previously, that they're contrary to the original intent of our sign ordinance. And I think they just add to distracting clutter. So that's my rationale for opposing this. I like the direction that Todd and Elizabeth are talking about of just keeping it as a temperature time sign there. But in its current configuration, I have to oppose this. It'll set a bad precedent. It'll be the first one of these signs that we've allowed. And I'm already very PO'd at the university, which doesn't have to. They get a pass. They don't have to comply with our zoning regulations in any way. They can build whatever they want, whenever they want, without meeting our zoning codes and our setback limits and everything. So I don't want to go down the road where we're opening the door to these changeable signs beyond what we've already done. So I'm going to vote against this.
So question for Ms.
Megan?
Yeah, so if we all say no, they have then the freedom to demolish the sign entirely to make one that conforms to the current requirements?
That would be most unfortunate, and I think people would be very PO'd. So my question to Mr. DeVarty is really, if it were flashing only as it currently is, time and temperature, do you object to that?
I'm fine with that. In fact, I agree with you, we don't need the time. And what I like is having the Celsius temperature.
Well, that's when the Congress
is
passes
on
the
there.
metric system, yeah.
No, that's on there.
I've been
It-
waiting since I was
It
in sixth
alternates,
grade.
they alternate the Celsius temperature with the Fahrenheit temperature, and I like seeing that. So that, but that's, I think it's good for us to know how the Fahrenheit temperatures convert to the Celsius.
But is that,
So
is that
my
from a
cons- my
safety
concern would be-
standpoint or a preservation standpoint? Because I feel more disappointed about the Arborland font being changed than I do
Right.
about the flashing, because the LED can change, you can change that font you can change that to anything.
So I think their legal position is that if we deny the variance today, they can do a sign that meets the current zoning ordinance. There's nothing that prevents them from doing that.
But it won't be.
Obviously, I think they realize that the people in the city of Ann Arbor would be PO'd. The problem is they're incurring increasing maintenance costs. Parts are going to be hard to get. At some point, it doesn't make sense to maintain it what you are. What if somehow this was turned into perhaps a refurbishment with new materials, but keeping the same dimensions? Would that need a variance? There's perhaps no way for us to do that.
Yes.
But I'm just concerned, since we say no, they're gonna say, we're not gonna spend $30,000 on this stupid sign, we're just gonna whack it and put up a little arborland that's 10 feet high, meets the zoning ordinance. That would be very unfortunate.
Okay.
I don't think we should set them up to do that.
I have a question for the petitioners. Your maintenance costs on this, are they primarily for the little light bulb changing temperature and, or is it for other aspects of the sign?
The reader board is approximately 60% of that cost.
Which one?
The reader board or the time and temp panel is approximately 60% of our maintenance costs. The Arborland sign itself has not been as intensive maintenance-wise, but you can see from the photo right there on the right, the cabinet's getting beyond repair. It's not a detriment right now, but it's not worth trying to keep it the way it is. We originally set out to refurbish it as is, because we appreciate that iconic status as well. Our CEO who acquired this shopping center, this is one of his biggest acquisitions to date, and his mantra is that we believe we should be the most important shopping center to the community in which it serves. I've taken countless phone calls from, concerned customers to let me know if we're off by a minute. If we're off, to your point, they truly care. I've had local newspapers interview me about what it takes to maintain that.
Right.
The hard part I can also tell you is anytime I need to change it for daylight savings, I have to pay Will's company to go out there, set up a bucket truck and go up and manually change it.
But
The new technology will allow us to do it from a smartphone. So it helps us cut down the maintenance costs, which is also another way to reduce the greenhouse emissions.
Mike, did you?
Yeah, so I'm in line with a lot of what I'm hearing from my colleagues up here about wanting to preserve this unique sign. To me, this is a gaudy, in a good way, sign, right? This is not supposed to be a subtle thing. So when it was built, if they could have had a more up-to-date flashing screen that put businesses, I'm sure they would have, but they just didn't have the technology at the time. They're not changing the size of it. They're keeping the look of the A and the Arborland pretty much the same. And, if they start flashing neon lights every 3 seconds, then I'm sure that they're not going to do that. So of us saying no to this, to me, of what they're trying to do with this sign and the flashing portion, I don't have a problem, so I'm going to vote yes.
So
I'll just say quickly, I have a tendency to agree with Mike. If the copy's only going to change every 15 minutes, I'm over halfway to work by the time the sign's going to change. So really, people driving by are only going to see one solid message on that sign at any given time, and then when they drive home from work 8 hours later, it'll be potentially something different. Again, if it was flashing every 10 seconds or changing constantly, like the university sign or like some changeable copy signs I've seen in other communities, I would have more concerns. But yeah, if it's truly going to be in conformance with what our ordinance requires as far as timing of the change, then I'm okay with it. Todd?
Yeah, so this may be a combined question for both Mr. Johnson's, I think, the expert from the sign company and staff. If, Mr. Johnson, is it possible just to upgrade the sign by replacing the time and temperature portion, putting new electronics in it, otherwise keeping the shape and the letters and the font the same? Just messing with the display?
So you're asking if, is the time and temp portion able to be updated?
Yeah, right. And
No, I mean, the existing time and temp that's up there is obsolete. You know, we can't get parts for it any longer.
I was talking about replacing that part only, leaving the A and the Arborland alone, and just replacing the electronics in the sign. Is that technically feasible?
Yeah, technically.
Okay. Well, then there's a follow-up question to staff. If they did that, why would they even need a variance? You're just upgrading the sign.
That may be true because it's an existing non-conforming sign, but that's not going to address where you see that, where it says 345 on that panel, if they're going to be advertising a
Right,
change
but
of copy.
Correct, but
Yes.
if they didn't have tenants and all they did was improve the ability to see temperature and time consistent with modern electronics and reliability, so it's not off by a minute or two and you don't get annoying calls, they wouldn't need it even to come before here, would they?
I don't believe so. I think it's because
If I
it's
may,
existing
the
non-conforming.
way I understand it, our second part is to bring it to LED technology.
I'm sorry, could you speak up a little louder? sir?
My
Slower?
understanding, and as we've researched this, is that the other part of the variance we are required is to bring the current cabinet and the A to LED technology requires a variance, because that's what we're saying, is the neon and the A has become equally expensive to maintain, and every time, because of the height that it sits, the weather and the winds that come through, it tends to go out quite often, and that's the other 40% of the $10,000 we've incurred over the past 3 years. So our hope is to set it up so it'll stay in a first-class condition often.
But continuing my analogy to the time and temperature, if you kept the same size and shape of the A and replaced the neon with LED, that would simply arguably be a refurbishment.
Correct.
Right.
And that's what we
Again,
intend to do,
why
is
would you
reuse
need
that
to come
exact A, just
before the
change it.
ZBA. And again, I would hope that Ms. Nelson, maybe the rest of the folks could look at putting a little bit of permanency on this thing. I mean, maybe I'm an Arborland signage radical in the city, but there's at least two other of us somewhere.
Dave?
So this is I'm gonna ask questions of both the developer and the staff again. So you can change out the lighting, keep the configuration, change out the lighting so it's modern and you don't have to go up there with a big lift to fix things, and have LEDs that last longer outside, or whatever the lighting would be on those A and the Arborland, and your digital temperature, and so you would be able to reduce your maintenance costs just by replacing all of that, and keeping really the intent of what we're looking at right now is an A sign with the time, and then another one at night with the temperature, and I like that. That's all good. But now I'm going to ask staff a question. If we didn't give them the variance, could they just refurbish it and do what we're looking at here in the right two pictures, and do away with, or reduce their maintenance costs by doing that?
Mhm.
So
Because it's refurbishing it and keeping it the same, basically.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the non-conforming signs while we're having these discussions, and what it's stating under no non-conforming sign, and I'm going to read it verbatim, shall have any change made in the structure, shape, size, type, design, or mechanical or electrical equipment of the sign unless the change brings the sign into compliance with this chapter. However, the building official may order repair of a non-conforming sign for safety. It then goes on for a couple of sections, says, no non-conforming sign shall have any change made that would result in different type of or greater illumination or an illuminated sign, or change a non-illuminated sign to an illuminated sign, and then goes on to state that shall have any change made to add mechanical or electronic features except ambient light monitors or regulate brightness in accordance with this code. The way I'm interpreting that is they need variances.
Anything they
Yeah,
want
is
to
that
do
how
would
you
require
interpret
a
it?
variance.
That's how I do. I think they need a variance. It's pretty,
I just get nervous trying to dictate speech on signs. I don't know, that's a little bit of a lawyer thing in me, but we have a code for that, they don't violate our code, but trying to tell them how long they have to have the time up versus a business's name, that's, to me, not my place as a zoning board of commissioner.
we might be saving them a hassle, and they won't have a fight among the tenants. Like, you had 5 below up there, but only discount shoes up half the time. So,
We ready for a motion?
well, I'm just wondering if perhaps you want to resubmit it maybe, but something would just be a fancy upgrade. It sound, I'm an attorney, Mike is an attorney, without having seen it visibly the way it's reading, it's so detailed that as it says, any change in electrical or mechanical, you gotta come before us. But my sense is if you were to perhaps resubmit it, just saying you were gonna do a modern upgrade, keeping the same shape and size, I would easily vote for it, and I think the other folks would. Where this currently presented with the tenants, you know, it's a little, we could amend it, but I'm concerned that I don't want to frustrate you folks so much that you decide, screw it, we're just gonna have a sign that meets the current zoning ordinance. You know, you would cross all the Ts, dot all the Is, but nobody would be really happy. So, what do you want to do?
I mean, my only question is that there a way that we could get approval where those changes are reviewed at permitting, or do we have to wait 30 days to come back to get? Because our goal is to try to get this done this calendar year.
Got it.
And so that's my only thing. Then we're getting into holiday months, which is a huge time for retailers out there. So we're trying to stay ahead of that curve, so we understand that. I will say, I believe Ms. Peters made a comment, I'm willing to change the font back to keep it more historic. I mean, there's certain details, we want to partner with the city to do this right. So we're very amendable, if, you know, to the sense, I mean, I wouldn't be doing my job for the tenants if I didn't request to get their names up there, because that's the biggest request they have of me. So I understand Mr. DeVarty's position on that, and I know that there's bias towards that in the industry and in the communities, but that's all I'm trying to attempt to do. I felt that this might be the best way to meet their needs and keep the preserved look. That was the intent, but that's something, if we go back to time and temp, we understand the position on that.
Well, in that case, I guess I'd propose an amendment along the lines that I've discussed, which is to keep the sign as much as possible as it exists, allowing them to upgrade the illumination and the electrical components to modern standards. I would like to do that.
Nicole, did you have a?
I do, I'm starting to fall in line with Mike and Candace. As much as I don't care for changing logos, this is an LED sign, and if the community feels that they don't like it, I'm sure, like you've said, you've heard from the community, and this is an easy sign to change, so if it's determined that people don't like it and you guys want to change it, you can easily change it back to time and temperature. So I think I will support it in this configuration.
Dave?
We all have a proposed motion in front of us, and somebody can make the motion. I'm going to propose that and this would allow me to vote for it, right when the non-bold type starts. I would say a variance to allow a 70-foot tall ground sign, cross out to have changeable copy messages and text, and replace that to be updated with current technology to maintain the historic character of the sign. And that way, it keeps the iconic identification of their shopping center, which is a benefit to all of their tenants. It doesn't break precedent and allow, for the first time, a changeable sign, and at that, a changeable sign that's 75 feet tall, and continues with kind of a historic sign, and they can replace it with current technology, reduce their maintenance costs, and still have it be a draw to their center. So I'm willing to either make the resolution with that change or to propose that change. If somebody else makes the resolution that's on our table, I'm going to propose an amendment because I want to keep the sign. I agree with you with that. I think it is an iconic sign for the community. But I don't want to establish the precedent that we're going to have changeable signs advertising businesses that are 75 feet in the air.
I would
Anyways,
support
that's
what you
what-
outlined, Dave. I like that. I like that reworking.
Mike?
My problem with the amendment's twofold. One, it changes right now, right, between temperature and time. The only reason it doesn't change to names is because it's limited by its technology. And then two, I get really nervous when we try to do drafting on the fly on something like this that's not changing like 5 feet to 6 feet, or, I mean, this is something I think needs a little more than a minute of reaction from us to think through what those words really mean for what they're allowed to do. And if I was the business owner, I'd be nervous about that too, so.
I have a tendency to agree. I think on the case of the previous petition where we amended it to put in a stipulation that they were removing something that it was really clear. Changing the language in this way, again, makes me a little bit nervous. I guess I would propose that we vote on what we have, and if that is denied, then the petitioner would have to come back with a different petition.
Well, I think we can agree the wording. I think Dave could write it out. My concern is they want to get this done this year, they said. That would allow, they'd have to go through the
Yeah,
entire
but every
process
petitioner that comes
again.
here wants to have their petition approved as quickly as possible. That's not on us
Well,
to fast-track something because
Well,
we
Why
sort
why
of
don't,
like
why don't
it.
we have Dave reread what he proposes?
I'm going to
It
propose
sounds
the
clear.
amendment, no matter what, and hopefully somebody will second it.
Would you guys be willing to increase the amount of time that these are changing?
I'm sorry, the amount of time,
Increase the amount of time that it's changing? Like, for example, I know the main concern is that we're gonna be putting a bunch of names, and, just south of here on Washtenaw, right across the street, I don't know if I'm pretty sure that's City of Ann Arbor. I think it's the shopping center right south of here, put up a message center that's full color. It changes every probably 5 to 6 seconds.
I think that as long as it's time and temperature, what you do with it, I don't have a problem. I think that's probably micromanaging. Time and temperature with no tenants, whatever you think works best for visualization.
But see, now I feel like we're getting into a gray area where
Right,
it's,
exactly.
you have changeable copies sort of with time and temperature, and you don't have to
Yeah.
comply with the ordinance on the
Right.
time. You can do whatever you want as long as you don't display logos. There's not something concrete in
Well,
front of us to
But-
vote
but I-
on.
Well, but I think Dave, I'm interested in Dave restating his amendment, because it sounded good to me when he said it the first time.
But this is a procedural question, right? If Dave proposes an amendment, it gets seconded, we vote on it, but we vote no, then do we go back and re-vote on the original variance?
Yes.
That's a good
Are
process,
we sure
yes.
that's how the rules
Kind
work?
of,
Yes.
that's the
That
way
is
things
correct.
work. Once a main motion is put forward,
Yep.
people can move to amend it. The
So there'll
amendment,
be a second vote on what's in front of us here.
Well, you vote on
Correct.
whether to allow the amendment, then you vote on whether to approve the amendment.
And then, if that amendment is not approved, we vote on the original.
So I think we should make the motion as it's presented. Dave can recommend the amendment. We can vote on whether or not there's support to add the amendment. If not, then we vote on the original motion,
That's fine? Yep.
Okay.
instead of making the motion 15 times until we get it right.
yes, that's,
That works for me.
that would be that's a normal legislative process.
That seems reasonable and
Okay.
sounds good.
Okay, so we need a motion, please, that is the motion as presented, and then once that's done, then Dave can propose his amendment. Mike?
All right, so petition ZBA 19-027, 3521 Washtenaw Avenue. Based on the following findings of fact, and in accordance with the established standards for approval, the zoning board of appeals hereby grants the following variance from Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, Section 5.24.4, to ground signs, and Section 5.24.13A changeable copy signs. A variance to allow a 75-foot tall ground sign to remain, and the existing time and temperature panels to have changeable copy messages and text. The panels will be 46.8 square feet per face. A, the alleged practical difficulties are peculiar to the property and result from conditions which do not exist generally throughout the city. B, that the practical difficulties which will result from a failure to grant the variance include substantially more than mere inconvenience, inability to attain a higher financial return, or both. C, the variance, if granted, will not significantly affect surrounding properties. D, the circumstances of the variance request are not self-imposed. E, the variance request is the minimum necessary to achieve reasonable use of the land or structure.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have support for that motion? Support from Megan. Okay. Dave?
I move an amendment to this proposal. And my proposed amendment is in the standard text, not the bold text, where it says a variance to allow a 75-foot tall ground sign to remain and the existing time and temperature panels to, and to change from the rest of that sentence to replace have changeable copy messages and text, to change that to say, to be updated with current technology and to maintain the historic character of the sign displaying time and temperature.
Second.
Okay. Hold on, I need 1 second.
So now, Ms. Breer, I think we're voting on the amendment.
So
right?
now we are voting on the amendment. Yes. Todd?
Yes.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
I vote no. Mike?
No?
Dave?
Yes.
Megan?
No.
Nicole?
No.
Okay, so the amendment is not passed. So we are back to the original motion without the amendment
Correct.
as presented. Todd?
You would have to call me first. Why me? Why are you always picking? No.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
I vote yes. Mike?
Yes?
Dave?
No.
Megan?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
The request is granted in its original form with no amendment.
Correct.
Moving on to petition ZBA 19-025-3400 Nixon Road. Chris?
Metro Detroit Signs, representing the property owners, are requesting a variance from section 5.24.6C, residential development signs. The variance would allow 14 non-illuminated directional signs to remain installed within the multifamily community. Presentation. This site is located south of M14 US 23 and on the east side of Nixon Road. It is zoned R4A, which is a multifamily residential zoning district. The aerial shows that while it's vacant, it has been developed into apartment units. You can see that there are residential units to the south and to the west. There's a close-up of that view. Here is the survey showing the 3 buildings housing the apartment complexes. Again, you can see them a little more up close. The little dots, I think, a little difficult to see, but that's where the 14 signs, and you can get an idea, and we'll go through what the signs look like that have been been installed on site for directional and wayfinding. You can see, we'll show where they obviously are installed on site, but they're showing where the addresses and garages are located. They're approximately 4 feet by 2 feet, so it's an 8 square foot one-sided sign. Again, it's a little difficult to see, but these are the signs that are located on site. We can always refer back to kind of the master map of showing where these signs are at. We might be able to get some close-ups in here, a little something more. This sign did receive a permit. They are allowed to have 2 apartment complex signs at the entrances of the development. Here's a typical address sign that's shown on one of the buildings. And these are the signs that were installed out on site showing directional signs for addresses. And close-up of the addresses of the apartment complex. And there's 14 of them that are shown throughout the site. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions, Mike?
Chris, so the signs in front of each building, if those were affixed to the building, would they be allowed to have signage?
Well, you know, I thought about that one. Any type of signage that has addresses less than a foot in height, they're exempt. So if they were to put something on there that was less than a foot, and I'm looking at the lettering and I can see that the lettering is less than a foot, it would be exempt.
Okay, so the issue is the size of the sign, not that it's on 2 poles versus on the
Correct.
building itself?
It's an 8 square foot sign.
Okay, got it, thanks.
Any other questions for staff?
Yes, I'm very familiar with this. I live in Orchard Hills. These the apartments have gone up fast. A lot of them are already sold and not even done with the rest of it. So I'm trying to remember, so they have the numbers, just the number signs on the buildings already, and these are an addition, is my memory. There are other signs that are scattered around. The signs already exist, I think. They're already there.
That's correct. The signs were installed. I'm going to let the petitioner answer whether every one of the buildings has an address on there. I know this is part of the presentation, but I can't confirm whether every one of the
Yeah,
buildings has
I can't
addressing on
remember.
there.
All right. Any other questions for staff? All right. If you could please state your name for the record, sign in. You have 5 minutes.
Hello, I'm Kevin Dieters from Metro Detroit Signs. The gentleman to my right is Mike Kolb. He's the Vice President of Woodbury Management, the property management company for Owl Creek Apartments. And basically the reason we're here is these directionals were installed because Owl Creek Apartments thought that they needed these in order to get their C of O per the fire marshal. And then after the fact, we found out that these signs don't meet the ordinance, the zoning ordinance, the sign ordinance, and that's why we're here. As it turns out, they were unaware that they didn't have to be ground-mounted directional signs. They could be address numbers on the building or other things like that. They just, at the time, they were under the impression, hey, if you want to get your certificate of occupancy, you need to get this taken care of. So we hustled and did it. And these signs are not intended for advertisement for Owl Creek Apartments. These are directional in nature. They're trying to identify if you're looking for this address, it's this way. If you're looking for this address, it's that way. There's a lot of different turns in buildings where you could be in this apartment complex. So these signs are non-illuminated. They're directional in nature. They're small, only 8 square feet. It's in a residential district, so the fact that they're non-illuminated, I believe that's not going to bother anybody or cause a hindrance for any neighboring properties. And they have a monument sign right now, as we saw in the picture, that advertises Owl Creek Apartments. So again, the intention of these signs was not to drum up more business for Owl Creek Apartments. It was an honest mistake. It was something we thought we had to do for them to get their C of O, and we're here to make this right. So we want to work with you guys and do whatever we need to do to move on.
All right. Thank you. Questions? Yes, Todd?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I am very familiar with this. it seems to me you really don't need to do any additional advertising. I think these things are being rented as fast as they can be built, is from my perception.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you
Oh,
said after you,
just be-
we don't need to do
My
more
My
advertising?
perception is these things are being rented as soon as they're built. Is that correct? Mike, I didn't catch your last name, is that right?
Yeah, that is accurate. We have rented the first building.
Yeah.
It came unavailable June 15th, and we are about 94% occupied in that first
Yeah,
building right now.
Yeah, yeah. And my second memory of this, I've gone around on one of my recumbent bicycles several times, and the numbers and the standalone signs are pretty small. You know, the whole sign, I think you said it was 8 square feet, but the numbers are pretty small. I didn't really pay attention to the numbers. I also had a really hard time identifying that the Squiggles was an owl. My wife had to explain to me, no, see this, see that, so, but, you know, I'm not an artist, so that's sort of an off-the-wall comment. So are you here because you really don't want to remove the signs, or are you here because you think you really need the signs that are in there? That's really my question.
I mean, I think we would like to keep the signs as is. I mean, according to when we spoke with the fire marshal, this was a requirement for them to get our C of Os. You know, we did build these not knowing that we needed to apply for this for the zoning department, so ultimately we'd like to keep these signs in place. It helps the residents find out where their building is, and also from a safety standpoint, if the fire department had to come in to the community, they'd be able to locate the buildings pretty quick.
My second and last question, there are numbers in each of the buildings, correct?
As of right now, only the first building has it, and it's very small on the front of the building. It says 3410 only. It's very
What is
small.
your plan? Is your plan to add numbers in all the buildings?
We were gonna add, those are a little bit bigger, but the other ones I believe are 6 inches, and it'll be 3420 going down the, one of the sides of the front entrance.
Okay, so each building will have a number for the fire marshal or whomever. to see.
Yeah, but if you're coming from different angles, you might not know where the building is, because it's only on one side of the building.
Okay. Are the numberings in a circumferential area? There's a logical flow to the numbers?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. No further questions. Thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioner? All right, thank you. We are, oh, sorry, is there anyone else from the public to speak on this petition? All right, now we are in discussion. Dave?
This is easy for me to support. Once you get into, I mean, most of the signs are not visible to anybody driving up and down Nixon Road, and anybody that's driving through the complex is obviously there to find somebody in the complex, and the signs are modestly sized. I'm going to vote for this. I just have one comment. The Owl Creek logo, which Todd can't, and even I can't figure out is really an owl. But I know people are really into branding, and you want to get your brand out there on every single thing you do. And, but it would be great, I'm going to vote for this, but it would be great to have the addresses and arrows bigger and the Owl Creek apartments smaller, because I think it would benefit anybody trying to find their way around. It would make it easier for them. But I'm going to vote for it.
Mike?
Yeah, I agree with my colleague, Mr. DeVarty. Easy one for me, not illuminated where this apartment complex is located. It's, you know, I think a lot of people who have been on this board for a while understand I'll open up to it, my phobia of not finding apartments in these big structures. I like as much wayfinding as possible when I get in there, so this is an easy one for me. And as far as the owl goes, I'm too not a graphic designer, but you know, I think it looks pretty slick. Maybe some of the residents may opt for a tattoo or something at some point, so I'm gonna vote for it.
Any further discussion or motion? Yes.
Saying yes, does that set any sort of precedence or anything for future people wanting to put bigger and more signs in other developments?
My response to that is, we do have a section in code. I think if these signs were 6 feet, I think they would have been fine. It's because they exceeded the size. We do have a section, I don't have it open in front of me, I could read it if you'd like me to find it, but I think if it was a 6-foot tall sign, you may have been able to look at this and say it would have been allowed signs around the site for wayfinding.
Okay.
A directional type sign.
Any other questions, comments? Motion?
I'll make the motion.
Okay,
on
thank you,
Dave's- on
Nicole.
Dave's request. All right, petition ZBA 19-025, 3400 Nixon Road, variance. Based on the following findings of fact and in accordance with the established standards for approval, the Zoning Board of Appeals hereby grants the following variance from Chapter 55, Unified Development Code, Section 5.24.6C, residential development signs. A variance to allow 14 non-illuminated directional signs, 2 feet by 4 feet, to remain installed within the multifamily community. The alleged practical difficulties are peculiar to the property and result from conditions which do not exist generally throughout the city. B, that the practical difficulties which will result from failure to grant the variance include substantially more than mere inconvenience, inability to attain a higher financial return, or both. C, the variance, if granted, will not significantly affect surrounding properties. D, the circumstances of the variance request are not self-imposed. E, the variance request is the minimum necessary to achieve reasonable use of the land or structure.
Second?
Thank you, Todd. Mike?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Megan?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
I also vote yes, the request is granted. Moving on, we have no unfinished business. We have dealt with new business. We have addressed communications. Is there anyone else from the public here to speak? Seeing no one, do I have a motion to adjourn? From Mike, support? From Nicole, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.